The war in Ukraine is primarily a war based on fossil fuels. So I say that not just because we are seeing that the access to fossil fuels has hampered the world's resistance to Russian invasion of Ukraine. So what I mean by that is the US and the EU are and the UK find it difficult to get rid to sanction Russian oil and gas because the European Union is largely reliant on it. And if the UK or the US were to sanction it, we would essentially be sanctioning our allies for using it. And they have to because they import a ton of it. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, Russia provides roughly 40% of Europe's oil and gas. So, and by the way, since the war has happened, since the war has started, I'm sure you've noticed that gas prices have gone up precipitously because of the global supply being restricted and having to get gas from other places. Now, it is true that in many cases, oil and gas companies have raised the prices just because, and they're essentially colluding to keep the prices high. But it is also the case that this is a war of fossil fuels. And the other reason that that's a war of fossil fuels is because there's been some reporting that there are significant deposits of oil and gas under Ukraine that were recently discovered, like in 2014. And this invasion may be an attempt to consolidate those resources under Russian ownership. So, all that being said, we have to remind ourselves that we are still, as a society, largely dependent on fossil fuels. There's very little that we cannot do without them. As of right now, we generate most of our electricity through fossil fuels. We heat our homes primarily through fossil fuels. We fuel our vehicles, whether ground, air, or sea vehicles, primarily by fossil fuels. So pretty much anything that anyone wants to do ever has to do with fossil fuels. It's powered by fossil fuels in some way, shape, or form. So the obvious solution here is to not do that, right? So how do we not do that? So in the U.S. context, we had this Green New Deal, as it was called. We actually didn't pass it, despite what Republicans will tell you. And what it would do, among other things, is limit our reliance on fossil fuels in general. It would put us in a position where instead of relying on fossil fuels to do the things that we needed to do, we might rely on batteries or electricity or solar panels or wind farms or hydroelectric or tidal power or geothermal or any of the other number of ways that we can generate energy without needing to use fossil fuels. And essentially, if we had already been there, we would have removed a significant amount of Putin's leverage that he has on Europe and the world economy in general, because we wouldn't need his gas. And especially because renewable resources are, well, renewable, there's no one who can restrict their supply, right? You can't stop geothermal vents from being hot. They are hot because that's of plate tectonics and how the earth works, right? You can't stop the sun from shining, the wind from blowing, the seas from battering coastlines, the waters from flowing through hydroelectric dams, etc. And if we're going to have wars, and by the way, and sorry, to say we only have wars over energy because the energy we have is a finite, limited resource. We would cease to have wars over energy literally overnight if we just had not unlimited energy, because I don't think renewable energy is unlimited energy, but non-finite amounts of energy, right? And by that, I simply mean energy that can be used and reused over and over again. like the sun or the wind or the waves. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez proposed the Green New Deal, the primary question she got was, how are you going to pay for it? And her remark, which I still think about to this day, is how can we not afford it, right? So the question was, how can we afford it? She says, how can we not afford it? And the reason that resonates so well is not just because as the climate changes, we will continue to pay the costs of rebuilding and moving people away from places that are no longer livable and accepting refugees. But we're also going to have, as these resources become more, as these non-renewable resources become more finite and thus more valuable, we're going to see wars over energy. And we'll probably see them around the same time we start seeing wars over water, right? As climate change intensifies, and as fossil fuels become more and more valuable because there are fewer and fewer of them, because we're burning all of them, we're going to get to a situation where we have these conflicts, where we have climate conflicts and energy conflicts. And if we had just, and those are incredibly expensive in both in blood and treasure. Blood obviously being much more valuable than treasure. And if we had just had the foresight to create a world where we were not so dependent on, geopolitical ownership of finite reserves of energy producing resources, we would be, as a world, just in a much better place. I would argue that if we had transitioned to renewable energy or clean energy, if you want to include nuclear, the war in Ukraine would never have happened. Now, look, the last time I said that about a casus belli, I was wrong. Right? I had talked about in the past how, NATO was probably the cause of this war, but it appears that is incorrect. So obviously, take that with a grain of salt. But it is not difficult to see that whether we like it or not, there are going to be wars concerning energy. But we can avoid that if we take the necessary steps to just make sure that energy is low cost or free for everyone. Not necessarily free at the point of service, but free in the sense that we don't have to dig it out of the ground. There aren't huge amounts of resource we have to put into getting that energy. And that energy isn't finite. It's not made over millions of years. The sun shines every day. The wind blows most days. It rains fairly frequently. The tides always go every day. The rivers are always moving. The earth is always producing shift, which causes the heat vents to get hot for geothermal. It's my hope that this travesty in Ukraine, which, by the way, is not the first climate-related conflict, now that it's happening to people who are receiving much more attention in the media, I hope this will spur us as a world, especially in the West, where we produce most of the carbon emissions of the world, will fuel us to make better decisions about our energy choices, will fuel us to move in a direction where one country cannot exert their influence by war and be appeased because of the way that they can provide oil and gas, these finite resources, to the rest of the world. It's going to take time to get there, and we should have started already. But it's my hope that this will be our awakening moment. I'm not confident that it will be, but I want to have hope. So there's my hope. Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you liked it, throw a like on it, share with your friends, and subscribe for more of our content. You can also find all of our videos and clips on youtube.com Just search Let Them Eat Bread and you'll find all of our content. All right, guys, see you next time. Bye for now.